I've gotten a lot of questions on what tools I use for my pumpkins and how I put the picture on it. So I decided I would make a video and I would show you what you need and how I do it. For the picture portion, razor blade, some straight pins, a piercing tool, a black Sharpie, a ballpoint pen, some rubbing alcohol, and washcloth. Then for the inside of the pumpkin, you'll need a scraper tool, and then on the outside you will need a speedball lino cutter. Then you need to pick your picture. You can draw one freehand, or you can just go online and look up coloring sheets and print your own. I used to freehand all mine, but then I kind of got lazy. I'm going to use this one. So you pick the one that you want, and then you're going to make it into a stencil. Cut around the outside, then work your way in with the X-Acto knife. You don't have to cut away all the empty space, but the more you remove, the less folding you'll have to do when you put it on the pumpkin. Once you've finished your stencil, you pick out your pumpkin. The smoother the pumpkin, the better, because the speedball tool doesn't like deep creases. Because of that, I'm going to be going with this one. After you've picked your pumpkin, find the spot on it where you want your picture to be. I try to center mine so all the small details are on smooth areas. Then you're going to stick 2 straight pins in it as place markers, just so it doesn't slide on you while you're doing everything else. The less straight pins you use, the better, because they leave bigger holes than the piercing tool. But you do need to stick them in all the major spots where the paper is loose or where there's creases in the pumpkin. The paper needs to fit the pumpkin like a glove. When I pin my pumpkins, I like to start with the faces and work my way out, just in case there's areas where the stencil needs to be folded or adjusted. For example, in some places where the paper is still a little loose because it's not fitting properly, you may need to tighten it by making small folds and then pin the fold to keep it in place. If you don't take care of that excess, your picture may come out wrong. It'll look off. By the time I finished this one, I had a couple spots where small folds were necessary, the biggest being where the constellation is. Another option would have been to cut it. It actually probably would have been easier that way, but I just left it on. Once you're finished putting in all your pins, it's time to use your piercing tool. All you do is follow along the lines and remove your pins as you go. Once all your pins are out and the paper removed, you can see the dots and just play connect the dots with your ink pen. But sometimes they're hard to see, so what I like to do is take my marker, go around the picture, and then scribble over it. After you've got a decent coat of marker over the picture, take your rubbing alcohol and spray or dump it onto your pumpkin, and then wipe it away with your washcloth. You may need to spray and repeat a couple times to get all the ink off. Once all the ink is off, you can see the pattern is easily visible, and then you just go over it with your ballpoint pen and play connect the dots. The reason it's important to use a ballpoint pen is because it's the only pen that won't wipe away as you go. The next step is to cut your lid. Now I cut mine like a puzzle piece because the lid tends to stay on better that way. And then the front you can get closer to the stem and above your picture. The hole needs to be big enough to get your arm in there really good, but not so big that the top ends up weighing more than the bottom, because then it'll collapse on itself once it starts to decay. Then use the scraper tool to clean and thin the lid. This will also help make it much lighter. Once the lid is done, move on to the bottom and spoon out the guts. Then use the scraper to smooth and thin out the inside. I go around and across the bottom first and then move on to the top edges. It's important not to cut too deep or the pumpkin will be too thin. Once the top and bottom is done, then you go around the sides, clearing out any and all leftover pumpkin goo. Once you're done, the inside of your pumpkin should be nice and smooth. Mine unfortunately turned out to have a small bad spot in the bottom, but that's okay because I'm still going to use it. At that point, I had put too much work into it to just throw it away. If you tape your lid on, it's much easier to maneuver the pumpkin while you're carving it. Otherwise, the lid is constantly going to be sliding off on you. Of course, you don't have to carve it with the light inside, but I choose to do it because I can better see my progress as I go. When you use the speedball tool, they usually come with 4 tips: a small tip, a medium tip, a large tip, and a flat tip. I found that the medium tip is the best tip to use when carving pumpkins. It can accomplish the same results as the small tip and the big tip depending on how much pressure you use. In my opinion, the small tip tends to fray and tear the pumpkin skin too much. The big one is more for shaving off large areas, for example if you're carving a moon, and the flat one is for evening out those big areas. They can be very sharp though, so until you get used to it, you'll want to keep a steady hand and take your time. As someone that began carving pumpkins only using an X-Acto knife, I can say the speedball tool is definitely worth it. The results are better and it's less hazardous for your fingers. The X-Acto knife is still a valuable tool, just now I only use it for stencils, to deepen cuts for the eyes, or to cut all the way through the pumpkin. Now if you want or need to achieve the look of stars in the sky, you'll need a variety of sizes of piercing tools or needles. All you need to do is puncture the pumpkin skin. In some places you'll want to go all the way through, while in others you don't. The whole process can be very time consuming, but if you enjoy art and you have the patience, it's worth it. Now as everyone knows, pumpkins don't last forever, but there is a way to extend their life. If you fill a storage container or tub something big enough to dip the entire pumpkin in, if you fill it with cold water, add in bleach, and then soak the pumpkin for anywhere from a half an hour to 2 hours, it will help keep away the decay. I usually leave mine soak until the meat of the pumpkin turns white. Soaking it just once will extend its life, but if you dip it nightly, you can make it last even longer. I've had some last as long as 3 weeks. Hopefully that answered everyone's questions. Now you know my whole process, all the tips and tricks I've learned and taught myself over the last 15 years. My kids actually didn't want me to make this video, and honestly, I almost didn't, but then I thought about why I ever even started carving pumpkins all those years ago to begin with. It was for them, it was for my boys. I wanted to do something special for them, to make them smile, to make them proud. They used to use the pumpkins as nightlights in their bedrooms. Then when I worked at the Glow, the best part of that job was seeing all the kids smile and take pictures with the pumpkins. So it's for those reasons that I decided to make the video. I figure maybe it'll help other parents bring smiles to their kids' faces without having to go through the long, drawn-out learning process that I did.